very commonly parents get diagnosed with their kids, right? Because generationally, these things weren't necessarily like shown. So like clearly when my daughter was diagnosed with ADHD, I was like, wait a minute. And so, my diagnosis was like at age 47, right? So that's a really common process too. And that's actually one of the even more challenging pieces is because, you've got a dyslexic kid, oftentimes you've got a dyslexic parent. So then, trying to manage a parent who may or may not be getting a formal diagnosis, but is starting to recognize signs kind of in their past, but also has their own challenges with kind of taking in this information and what they're gonna do about it. And that is one of the biggest challenges. And I think one of the things that schools tend to overlook, they see that student in the chair and they know there's something that needs to be done, but they don't always recognize that the parent that's sitting across from the desk probably also has the same issue. I am a mother first, and a lot of what I do for my work has stemmed from my experience with my own two children. I have two neurodiverse children. One of them has dyslexia, dyscalculia. The other one is AuDHD. So we have sort of a whole range of neurodivergence in my household. So I homeschooled both of my kids. That led to some experiences in sales, working for a homeschool curriculum. I pulled them out. I homeschooled both my kids for most of their education. And so that right now I work as a sales consultant. I help companies bring their products into the homeschool space. And then I also do speaking in order to help parents who are sort of in the same position as I am, kind of learn from what I've learned over the years with my children.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Angela, what was the decision behind the homeschooling side of it? When did that was that something that you'd always thought of, or was that something that you thought, actually, this is what I need to do to help my daughters?
Some of it was situational. We moved across the country. The U.S. is a very big country, so we moved from North Carolina all the way to Oregon, and so we were having a major lifestyle change. We moved to a rural location, which had very few resources compared to where we came from, and so that was a little bit of an experiment. My oldest had really only attended kindergarten, and my youngest had not really been in school yet. But already in kindergarten, there were signs that it would not have worked perfectly for her. I remember her teacher during the parent-teacher conferences told us that she never got recess because she was finishing her work, right? So it took her so much longer to complete her work that when you finished, you got to go outside and play, and she was never getting to play. And the teacher, which I was happy to hear, was concerned. The interesting thing is when we went home and talked to our daughter, she was like, that's true, but everybody else does sloppy work. And so as a parent, it's hard to then say, no, do crappy work so you can play outside. Like she always sort of had that standard, I guess, for herself. But it was not working in school. The other thing was that she was getting labeled as slow, which, she didn't really register because she was, 5 at the time. But the slow was actually kind of a physical slowness. It just took her longer to do things, which is very common with a kid with dyslexia. She's actually gifted and incredibly bright. She's spoken on stages with me and is actually probably more fun of a podcast host than I am. But because it took her so long to do her work, they were calling her slow in school. And so, imagining what that would feel like, 13 years of that in a school system was just something that I wasn't willing to let happen.
Absolutely. And having, met both of you when you did, you come over for Oxford, which we'll go into, shortly, what an incredibly strong, minded and inspirational. I mean, you both are. Your daughter is just like, after meeting her, and I do think it's wonderful that you've both been able to kind of keep that and harness that. And I feel the restriction that may have happened had she been in I don't know, normal education, whatever the terminology is.
Yeah.
I think that would have been such a shame on so many accounts.
Yeah. She has a very secure sense of self, and she's and I think a lot of that has just come from us, being privileged enough to kind of take her out of the school system and do things our own way.
What would you say then? How important is the environment for individuals? I mean, we talk about this as adults. So if we're saying, like if you go and work in a workplace and it just doesn't feel right, you have that ability, apart from the financial constraints and the other bits and pieces. But long term, you have a plan where you can say, actually, this doesn't fit for me. I can look for a new job. But how important is it? I mean, from an educational point of view, from the UK, you're there secondary school. Sixth year is class is sixth form or college. I'm not too sure in the US how long that is, but 6 years. I mean, we couldn't even fathom if someone said to you today, you need to go and work in a workplace that isn't inclusive and doesn't work for you for 6 years. That would be quite torturous.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of, the movement in the United States towards like having school choice. And, there's, homeschooling was always on the rise. Of course, COVID, sped up that process. People, kids are not being served, and parents are being increasingly helped in some ways to take their kids out of the system. It unfortunately is setting up a system where kids who don't have parents who can work from home like I did, or things of that sort, to support them. It's leaving a lot of kids out, which like breaks my heart. But it is sort of behind the whole movement, is because the schools in the US really do kind of teach to the middle. And so anybody who's not there is losing out. So if you're behind, if you have something you struggle with, it's really, largely not being helped. And then also if you're very gifted and very smart, you're not being able to kind of go as far as you would be able to go otherwise.
I think, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's incredibly difficult, isn't it? Because if you know that your child is struggling in school and you work the 9 to 5 and you can't homeschool your child, that's the difficult part, isn't it? As you mentioned, you can't, if you took the child out and thought, actually, I'm going to homeschool, and you haven't got the ability to homeschool, and some people can't homeschool, it's probably just not something that they can do.
Mhm.
And I think that's the kind of the bottleneck, isn't it, for parents, and heartbreaking in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the largest group of people who are going to homeschool now in the US, because the numbers, have pretty much doubled since COVID, really are parents of neurodivergent students. Like that's kind of the rising, because they're being so poorly served in the systems that we have. And so there are all kinds of challenges. There are lots of, school choice is not just homeschooling here. There are a growing number of options. There's micro schools, there's co-ops where people work together. So there are people who work 9 to 5s who do pull it off, but it's certainly not easy. My family drove one car and went on very few vacations so that we could, we definitely took some financial sacrifices over the years in order to do this for our children. There's certainly, a segment of society that won't be able to take advantage of these, but there are schools cropping up, charter schools. They have things called personalized learning schools, largely in California, but some in other parts of the state that kind of are what look like homeschooling, but supported. Like you have a teacher that comes and visits, and they have tutoring centers that your kids can go to get extra help if they need it. So there's a whole like range of options that are starting to become available in the country to kind of get kids what they need. So.
What's the kind of the process look like for that? I know you mentioned, so if a child is struggling, is it then, to speak to the school, see if there's something, or do you just kind of just know, actually, this is just not going to work. I'm going to look at different avenues. I mean, it's not an easy process in all aspects. And the main thing is you just want your child to just be safe and happy and learn and be in an environment. But what is that? I guess the process is different for different children, different parents, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, generally in the US, they have a thing called an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. So, when a problem crops up, you go through this process, which, has some legal, ramifications to get your kid identified, what they need, things of that sort. What you find though, like in an area like mine, like over 30% of kids have an IEP. And when you have a classroom with 30 children, you can't really give individualized attention to 30% of the class. So a lot of it is resources. School systems, especially in rural locations like where I live, they don't have the resources to give the kids, what they need in some ways. And how well those get carried out, it depends on the school and the location and the resources and all of those things. I was a little bit disappointed. I actually am on the Decoding Dyslexia board in the state of Oregon. When I first came, that a lady who'd been running it for, I believe, 30 years at this point, was just like, yeah, when parents come to me. So one of the things with like dyslexia in particular, parents think that once they get a formal diagnosis, then the school will do something, right? And so they spend a lot of money and a lot of time getting that done, and it doesn't really change anything. And so the people from the board largely tell parents, like, if you want to do something about this, you're going to have to take it into your own hands. And that's sort of part of what I speak on as well. Is it's the system's broken. We definitely need to fix it because there are kids falling through the cracks, but at the same time, like, parents don't have the luxury of waiting for systemic change with like the public school system where they live. So largely you need to take things into your own hands if you're going to make sure your kid gets what they need.
Absolutely. And I think it's a massive journey, isn't it, for the parent as well, to kind of educate themselves on, and it can be massively overwhelming. I'm sure, it's kind of, when they say the words, you now need to take this into your own hands, that, yes, it's true in aspects. You need to kind of fight for it, and everyone will fight for their children. Absolutely. But that itself would be so overwhelming because there's so much to try and understand while the emotions is high as well, because ultimately you have your child best interest at heart, and that the emotions must just be off the scale.
Yeah. And, interestingly, my kids were both like very late diagnosed with all of their diagnoses. They were teens for everything. And that was largely because, I kind of, I knew that there was something up, which is why, I took my oldest out of school. And then my youngest was like, if she doesn't have to go to school, I'm not going to school either. So that was how they both homeschooled. I naturally adapted. That's kind of the thing that happens in a homeschool, right? You've got this, one kid who takes a little bit longer to read, so you just adjust for that. And you've got another kid who, wants to do math all day, so you adjust for that. And so those things kind of naturally happen, which, in the kind of environment that I had for my kids. But the diagnoses would have been helpful to have them a lot younger. Like, it just, like, for Sophia, she's a dyslexic that can read. And so you never really, like, that's like the big sign, right? Everybody, if she can read, you would never suspect dyslexia. Of course, she could never spell, and she was a very slow reader. She basically had just memorized every word she had ever seen, which is, I don't know how she did that. So there were, but once that diagnosis came, which was, for her, I think it was 13ish, so many questions were answered. And there were so many things that I wished I had done maybe during the process as well, because if I had had that kind of insight, like, so many things just made sense to me. Her speed frustrated me. I have ADHD, so that's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. So there were a lot of challenges with that. And had I known about pretty much every one of all four of their diagnoses sooner, I could have done better by them, I feel. So that's kind of part of, what I talk about for people too, but it is very overwhelming, especially when you first get the information. What do I do with this? How do I manage well? And I just spoke to a family on the phone the other day because they pulled their kid out of school, and he's clearly neurodivergent, and the mom is, beside herself, which I totally understand. Like, we all just want to do the best we can for our kids, right?
Absolutely. And I guess that's the thing. You talk about this, with on stages in Oxford universities and in global stages and things, and you've educated yourself and you continue to learn on these things. And I guess, if someone's listening to this and they've got a diagnosis, or they're going through the kind of the process, what would you say they would kind of, I wouldn't say the kind of the first steps, but just to kind of, because I can imagine, when I got diagnosed with dyslexia at 36, it was a not tick box, but I went for a whole roller coaster of emotions, because I could look back on when I wasn't able to get promotions at jobs, or I struggled in certain environments, and when I've excelled in other elements as well.
Mhm.
And it were almost like flashbacks, as if they were real things. And I'm still trying to, at the age of 49, I'm still trying to identify and understand how it still affects me in my day-to-day life. So if a parent is listening to this, what would you say that kind of starting point of trying to understand would be?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny that you say that, because also, sometimes parents, actually very commonly, parents get diagnosed with their kids, right? Because generationally, these things weren't necessarily like shown. So like, clearly when my daughter was diagnosed with ADHD, I was like, wait a minute. And so, my diagnosis was like at age 47, right? So that's a really common process too. And that's actually one of the even more challenging pieces, is because, you've got a dyslexic kid, oftentimes you've got a dyslexic parent. So then, trying to manage a parent who may or may not be getting a formal diagnosis, but is starting to recognize signs kind of in their past, but also has their own challenges with kind of taking in this information and what they're gonna do about it. And that is one of the biggest challenges. And I think one of the things that schools tend to overlook, they see that student in the chair and they know there's something that needs to be done, but they don't always recognize that the parent that's sitting across from the desk probably also has the same issue. So that is a really challenging piece. Personally, everybody does things differently, but all the reading I possibly can, right? And there is, at least for dyslexia, there's like kind of a free course online that's taught by, Sally Shaywitz at Yale, who's like, one of the world's experts. So there's a video course that's available online. Things like decoding dyslexia, there are communities to find. So yeah, personally, the most important thing I feel is just to find that community, people that understand what you're going through, have walked the road before, can I guide you, can be there when, you're having your bad day because your kid took 20 minutes to tie their shoes, like just, and you have ADHD, so it's making you really crazy, right? So I'm finding that community is really important. The beauty of the internet is it really does bring people together. You can find communities so easily in so many ways. Like even if you just start at the most basic Facebook group, right? And there's always going to be some, parent in there that's like, oh yeah, I've been there. This book helped me. This story helped me. This is, some of the most supportive environments I've seen have actually been in Facebook groups, which is, Facebook's probably not my favorite place to hang out, but there's just a lot of parents who really are, kind of helping each other kind of walk this path.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the community side of it is definitely when I went on my kind of journey to start understanding dyslexia for myself. It was to reach out to as many different organizations and communities as possible. And I felt so blessed that they were able to kind of answer some of the questions I had. And sometimes I didn't even have any questions that I asked. I just it was almost like a tsunami of people asking the questions I wanted to ask, or I didn't know how to articulate. And I think that was the beauty of the community. And you mentioned social media, and some people say social media is good and some say it's bad, but as a point of connectability, if that's a word, of connecting people and having those conversations, I think it can be incredibly rewarding. But I think in the initial stages, you do feel like you're on your own, don't you?
Yeah, of course. And part of it too, like even like my youngest daughter, I mean, she's very bright and she's very successful in all the like normal measures, right? Like she can recognize patterns, she can memorize stuff and spit it out. So by every way that school traditionally measures intelligence, right, she's very, very successful. So like her diagnoses were very late, and even autism has been within the last year. And now, of course, in hindsight, I see all of it. But, as a parent, I just recognized there were so many ways I could have supported her along the path, right? Because there were other signs, the anxiety that comes with, not having maybe the perfect environment, or too much pressure on yourself, or just, what that means for somebody's like life experience. And so, as a parent, there's also like that, there's a little bit like for me, even though, here I'm this parent who like speaks on world stages about neurodivergence and supporting your students, I still, there was still a part of me that had to grieve that, because I felt like there were things I could have done but I just didn't know, right? And your brain knows that's life and that's how things happen, and that you have to just move from that point on. But you still have this period of where you feel that that grief for what maybe could have been, or things that you would have known, things that you would have done differently.
What are the kind of things that you don't have to kind of list in that sense, but I mean, I think personally meeting yourself and meeting, your daughter, I think you've done an incredible job. And I guess you're probably just reflecting on the other things that, you could do. You mentioned also as well about anxiety. And anxiety is a massive thing, something that, is been in my life pretty much all my life since, and I don't know whether it was the anxiety around the dyslexia or mental well-being or whatever that was.
Yeah.
How have you been able to kind of manage that? And we're talking, with regards to with your daughters and with with yourself. What does that look like when you're looking at managing that or understanding it?
Yeah, I mean, the anxiety piece, it's like for my youngest. So my youngest is much more like me in a lot of ways, and so, and I think that's part of it. Is it just like I saw myself in her, and I'm like, oh well, I turned out okay, so she's clearly she's clearly doing okay, and so it snuck up, I think, on all of us. I certainly, eventually, which again, I live in a rural area, so resources are super duper limited. So even though I am the mom who will do anything, and I probably have more resources than your average person in my community, I still can't get my kids sometimes to the people that they need to be to. So I can't actually imagine what that is like for people who don't have, who aren't able to drive 3 hours and stay in a hotel so that their daughter could get, their formal diagnosis, right? It's so I mean, we've been lucky enough to be able to pull my youngest into some counseling. Honestly, martial arts has been amazing for, kind of modeling, and helping kids kind of find their, a way in which to kind of manage their emotions. I think that's been very interesting. And in fact, her dojo is full of neurodivergent kids, which I think is kind of interesting. I think that tends to be one of the activities that works really well for students. For me, working with my kids, and part of what I speak about and what I think is the most important piece is just the teaching your kids how to advocate for themselves. Like, that is because, first of all, you're going to be there forever. My husband always tells me we're raising adults, not children, right? Like, the end goal, you like start with the end in mind, right? Like, you want, and that is really kind of the most important piece, because people, neurodivergent people in all types of situations, right? You need to know what your needs are. You need to be able to communicate your needs very clearly, right? And you need to know, you need to have support systems, and you need to know what to do if somebody's not willing or able to meet those needs, right? And so, part of the process as your kids are growing up is to, not do it all for them, and to hand that piece to them. And learning how to advocate for yourself really is kind of the most important skill, especially neurodivergent people can kind of have going forward.
Yeah, and so beautifully put. And you touched on the subject of martial arts. Now, I absolutely love martial arts, and that's something that I've done many years. And I actually stopped before I got diagnosed with dyslexia, because one of the things within martial arts is the forms, in the sense of you have to do certain forms and certain moves and certain times, and obviously you get graded for these. And there's I used to love the physical side of it and the sparring and everything else, but when it came to the actual forms, and you have to do 30 odd movements and different things, and they would show me how to do these things, and within a nanosecond I would just forget, and I would just be the person I just stood there trying to do something and just trying to remember. And it wasn't until actually after the diagnosis I then understood this, and I was able to go back and communicate and say, look, I'm really struggling here, because I just felt not like shame. It was a real tough thing. And what I actually was able to do was actually get them to video their moves. So when you go into different gradings and different things, they would video it. I would video it, and then I would just play that, and then it repetitive, just continue. But that initial thing, I didn't know why I would just forget it within a nanosecond.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
when it's, but I mean, that's kind of the whole idea, right? Like you figured out what you needed, you used your resource, and then you were able, like that. But there's some level of self-awareness that you have to do that. And I think that's the piece that sometimes is getting missed as these kids grow up, right? And part of it is, when they're small, the parent has to do it, right? But it's so important to kind of like walk through that process with your kids because they need to be able to do that. They need to be able to go, know what they need and ask for it. And honestly, like AI has been, for like just a game changer for my dyslexic daughter. Like she's taken college classes and gotten A's, and and even she says, had I been born 3 years earlier, this would have been a completely different experience. And so that's a really amazing piece of what's happening right now for her and for neurodivergent people in particular. I think there's a lot more awareness, obviously, but there's also tech and tools that can really make a difference in your life.
So I know that you came to Oxford, and we caught up, which was amazing. To have dinner and hear about. Can you tell us a little bit about the talk? I mean, the most amazing thing is that you both got to talk. Mother and daughter, and you're invited to speak. Can you just tell us, because it was about kind of was it neuroinclusion and assisted tech? Was that
It was.
yeah? You tell us a little bit about that, because I mean. And again, that was no mean feat, because to get you over, that was a quite a travel, wasn't it?
Yeah. From the West Coast of the US, it was definitely a big trip. My daughter, one of the common dyslexic strengths is that, she is like a people person and she's super comfortable. I mean, it didn't strike her at all at like 17 to go speak, at Oxford. Like it was like she didn't miss a beat. I was nervous. She didn't seem to register it. She's just and in fact, one of the reasons she's not here with me today, because she should be, is she's in Germany right now as a youth ambassador for the Department of State. So she got into a very prestigious program actually in the US and is out there kind of representing our country. So we'd always said she's good at peopling, and that, that's what's taken her to where she is, and it's what's making her really good at what she does. So we gave a talk at Oxford, and part of it is we had gone to like IDA conferences, so the International Dyslexia Association, together as well, and just found that there's a lot of talk about K-5, like the youngest kids and their reading and of course getting them where they need to be. There was very little about, high school, college, early career people, right? Like how to support these students. And so Sophia immediately kind of recognized that there was a gap in what was being spoken about. And so we started doing that, which is really fun as a parent to be able to kind of present with your kid and to come to Oxford. So she talked about some of the tech basically that supported her. So we talked about, kind of my guideline for like, this is how you teach kids how to advocate for themselves. And these are the important pieces of it. But then she spoke on some of the tech that she uses to kind of support her learning. Because it's amazing stuff. I mean, there's like voice to text, whisper flow will kind of do, and it works in everything. Like it works on her phone, it works in her email, it works in everything. That she can write a paper with it. Not only that, in Germany, I still can't get out. She can switch between German and English and it still gets it perfectly. Like it'll put in the German word, or like it will like go back and forth between languages, which is kind of brilliant. She uses text to speech all the time. Apple devices all have really good, accessibility things, but there's also programs, and I'm terrible to say, I can't remember the name of it, but there's one where you can just take pictures of something and it'll read to you. So like if there's a menu, especially like if it's like up on a wall in a restaurant, because that's one of the things that tends to slow her down. She can read it, but it just takes her longer, and there's a line brewing behind her, right? And so you can take a picture and it'll just read it to you, and so that helps speed her up. Claude is both my daughters actually use Claude to make study guides, right? Like, hey, I've got a test on these 5 chapters in this book, and can you create a study guide? Can you create a quiz for me to help me review? It can turn all the key phrases in a textbook into flashcards, so then you can review flashcards on your phone when you're sitting on the bus, right? So there are so many like amazing. There's also Oh, see my brain at 3
It's
a.m.
I tend to use Notebook LM. If I'm doing some research, I'll because I love podcasts and everything is either visual or audio. That's how I learn. I'll
Yeah.
watch YouTube or I listen to something. And Notebook LM has been phenomenal for me because I will literally throw it so many different links and say, give me a synopsis of this. And then I get kind of a 10 to 15-minute podcast, so to speak, about
Mhm.
all of the key topics. And then I'm kind of hooked. I've got enough knowledge to go in, and you can go much deeper within that
Mhm.
side of it. But that's been a game changer for me.
Yeah, yeah, and she has one where she records lectures, like, in college, and then it creates, like, notes for her. The interesting thing for her, and I think this is true of a lot of neurodivergent students, you know, they in the middle school here, they start teaching note taking, like, that's because that's your, like, road to success, right? Cornell notes, you know, the whole process, and there are a lot of neurodivergent students that does not work for, right? So like me with ADHD, it did because it made me focus, right? Because I was writing things down. But like on the flip side for her, you know, it's so hard to write. Like she's slower at writing, you know, and people are talking at you at a certain speed. Spelling is a challenge, and so taking in all of the things, right? Like being able to listen to somebody and then try to write things down and keep up with the pace, and it's like most dyslexic students, it's impossible to do that, right? But I mean, I tutor a bunch of dyslexic students too, and I not one of them is not incredibly bright. And honestly, if they can actually just sit there and relax and listen, they will take so much more information in. And so, so for her, she started recording her lectures in college, and you know, it created notes for her, but she never needed them because she could just sit there and listen. She just was taking it in, and that was enough for her. And there was because the stress of trying to get notes written is just too much. And then it gets too many different, you know, things going on at the same time, right? Like mentally.
I think my kind of memory of note taking was kind of a harsh one in school. When the lessons I was allowed to sit, I was excluded from a lot of lessons because on like those dyslexia issue, you know, I've spoken about.
Mhm.
But a couple of lessons I was allowed to CDT, which is kind of like woodwork, PE, so physical education, and then I think it was art and drama, which was the two things. And when you were talking about note taking, we were kind of a ruckus kind of class, I guess, and we never in the whole time we never really got to do any art. I think one or two lessons, but I'd always remember going into the art lesson. And we had this teacher, and he was quite strict. And the minute he was almost preempted that the class would cause, I don't know, trouble, or they would just say something. It wasn't me, by the way. And I'll put that out there. But within sort of 6-7 minutes, it decided what the class was going to be, and then the class always turned into dictation. And what he would do is I mean, we were in secondary school, I think, you know, year 5, 6 or something, or year 1, as back in my day.
Mhm.
Anyway, he would get a book which was just like, I don't know, English literature or something, and it had all of these massive words in, like huge words. And I just remember we had reams and reams of paper, and we had this pen that was scratchy, so it was very difficult to write with. And he would say something, we'd have to write it down. And I always remember him walking around the classroom and then looking down at how people were writing. And if we didn't write it properly, then he would then say, "Will you do it again?" Or you'd stay behind and write again. And that, for me, is always stuck in my mind of how, you know, note taking. And I can imagine from my school how many people were, you know, neurodivergent within that classroom. You know, now we can talk about it, but I know that's extreme note taking, but it's just those environments where they kind of, you think actually that note taking is just, it's just awful, especially trying to spell some of those words where, and I just really thought to myself, why can't I do those things? But yeah, I think if you were able to kind of just sort of sit, listen, take it all in, I probably would have learned something.
Yeah.
But the stress environment of trying to perform and conform to how they wanted that information, and
Mhm.
I think, to be perfectly honest, it's probably a punishment, to be perfectly honest, but it's that element. There was one other time as well. You talk about taking something in. I remember doing a talk at quite a prestigious place, and it was incredible, and I was very excited, a little bit nervous, as you always are.
Yeah.
And I remember this gentleman was sat at the front, you know, really good turnout. It was amazing. And he kind of sat there and he sort of slouched back with his legs out. And I remember sort of walking back from the stage a little bit so I didn't stand near his legs. And the minute I started talking, he put his arm like this and he shut his eyes and led back. And throughout the entire talk, he just shut his eyes and did. And it was really quite off-putting because I was kind of looking, talking to everyone, and then glaring, and then looking away. But do you know what? As soon as the talk finished, he came up and he shook my hand and he said, "Thank you so much. I learned so much. That was brilliant." You know, all the niceties. And I was said, so I'm shocked. I said, "I thought I sent you to sleep." And he then said, "No, that is how I take in the information." He said, "I'm sorry." And I thought to myself, well, you could have sat at the back. But I didn't say that. But that would be wrong with me. But it is, isn't it? And I think this is where we have to kind of understand how people take in information, how we have to work with each other, and how we can, adapt and support people. But
Well, and some of it too is just, him actually communicating that, because I could see him getting in tons of trouble for school for doing that, when he was probably like taking it in even more than a lot of students who are, pretend staring at the person in the front of the room, right? Yeah. Like I kind of laugh because my youngest has this thing where she's just like, you get this thing when you don't look people in the eyes, and people were like, look, people will tell you to look them in the eyes, which is not comfortable for a good proportion of the population. Or if you do, then you can't, you're not registering what they're saying. Right. So that's what happens to her. Somebody tells her to look them in the eyes. And so of course she like stares at their forehead or their nose because it's definitely not their eyes, but someplace on their face. So the person doesn't recognize, but she's spending so much time concentrating on that. Every word that is coming out of that person's mouth is not being registered, right? Like she's not taking any of it in because she's going, look them in the eyes, look them in the eyes, look them in the eyes.
That's the focus.
Yeah. Yes.
That's the focus. I tend to lip read. I always have for some reason, continuously try and it's almost, I can't take what the person's saying unless I can kind of look at their lips and even though I can hear them, it's always been something for me. And I always find it strange when people say, "Oh yeah, they went and then they point, when they say, "Oh, they went that way," but then they turn around and start talking this, to be able to do those things. And I'm just completely thrown. And I almost come back and then I ask them again and then they do the same thing. And whether it's a British thing or not, I'm too polite to turn around and go, "Oh, okay, like, can you stop? Can you just focus? Can I just talk to you face on face, on that side of it?" But yeah, I mean, communication is a massive thing, and understanding how we are able to communicate with each other. But I can imagine with your daughter that stress element of, right, my focus purely is to get through this conversation and just look and just stare, and then be able to articulate afterwards is going to be pretty much near impossible.
Yeah. I'm looking like I'm paying attention, but I am no longer able to take in your information, right?
So Angela, you're so with regards to kind of because you live in a very kind of small community in right kind of rural, would you say? We're kind of out.
Yeah.
So, but you're both very kind of travel orientated and global minded. Where did that kind of come from then? Because you live in a very small community, which is incredible, very isolated in that sense. But you've always, I mean, speaking to your daughter as well, you've got this kind of global plans and global missions. And do you see what I mean? Where does that come from? And how did it install in your daughter as well?
So I was not always in this rural community. Like I was raised in like Raleigh, Durham, which is actually a pretty large, highly educated area too. One of the things they brag about Raleigh, Durham is that it's the highest concentration of PhDs in the world. Apparently, it's like a thing that they're very proud of. But because there's three major universities there, it's kind of what, has been built. And there's a research center between the three universities. So that's where I came from. So that's really kind of, the background of where all that was. I didn't necessarily recognize how young my kids were when we moved here, though. So for the most part, they really have been raised in, it's rural, but it's also isolated. We have like kind of mountains around us. There's even times where you can't get in or out of where I live, which is kind of cool too. So So I think, some of that is coming from, who the parents are. My husband's also an anthropologist. So that's also instilling this like knowledge and of the world. So that's sort of the way that's ended up in my house, even though they're rural. It was very striking to me. I spoke to my daughter in Germany that her family, she lives in a fairly urban area. And it's hard for her because I didn't recognize that like her whole life really has been rural. And so, riding a bike when there's buses and stuff is very, it's hard for her. And they went apparently on vacation to some place that was like out in the country, and they kept getting caught behind tractors. And the family was very annoyed, but Sophia was like, "Oh, this is so nice." Like she felt like she was at home again. So yeah, my kids both have a love of travel and learning, but they do also, this is still feels like home to them, which is kind of an interesting turn of events.
I think it's wonderful, isn't it? Really, in this day and age, that we can have the access, whether it's virtually or whether it's physically, to kind of experience how different communities are in different ways of living in life. I grew up in a very, I guess, an area which was very highly populated in that sense, and I guess one of my goals really was I just love nature. I love the idea of being out in the sticks side of it. So that was kind of my driving force to make sure that I had that peace and quiet element of that side of it. But it's strange. I love the kind of the hustle and bustle side of it, but then I love the peace as well.
Mhm.
Even to a point where when I'm kind of working, so I give you an example. It's quite a strange environment sometimes, because I love the peace and quiet in the sense that I always wear my headphones, so my earpods or AirPods, and I'm always listening to classical music whenever I'm working. But I love going to a coffee shop, and this is the ironic thing. I love going to a coffee shop that's incredibly busy, but it's almost like visually, I love seeing the busyness and the craziness that's all going on. But inside, I love the quietness and the calm of the classical music that's playing. So it's like a movie. Sometimes you're seeing all this kind of craziness is going on and all the loud stuff, but you're almost sat in an environment which is calm and zen.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain to people when they say, well, why didn't you just work from home? But I love, I get it must just be that stimulating side of it.
Yeah, there's something with ADHD that they call body doubling too, right? Like you end up being more productive because there's other people around you.
Really?
But then the sound can also be distracting. So it's like one of the ways to get both of those things that kind of help you focus with ADHD. So yeah, my one daughter I have like lives in those, that we even got Bose, like really nice, like sound reducing headphones. And then my other daughter doesn't like to be boxed in like that. Like it makes her feel like there's something she's gonna miss. So she wears hers but has one ear out. It's like this very odd mix. But I do feel that even personally, like I do get more work done when I'm sitting next to someone else. But I am very sound sensitive too. So it's kind of it's a funny thing, isn't it?
How do you so how do you kind of regulate in between those? You mentioned with your daughter in the sense of one headphone out, one in, and that. Do you ever get times, because you do a lot of speaking and you do a lot of kind of working with organizations and events and everything else like this? Do you feel that sometimes you're overstimulated in the sense of the noise and everything, or and then you take a while to be able to calm down afterwards, or are you're okay with that? How do you kind of do you have kind of a strategy for a rest period after that, or
Uh,
or
yeah, I am definitely an extrovert, and so every bit of that like gives me energy. So I like travel, meeting people, being on stage, meeting. I live for all of that, like all of it. I actually was just in Bosnia for 2 weeks with the community that I'm part of, and was around people from all over the world, and there was like not a moment that I wanted to not be talking to some new person about what their life is like wherever they are, right? Like that to me is like the most fun in the whole world. But in the same token, everybody would co-work a lot, and there were spaces that they would be in that I just recognized I would not be able to be productive in. And most of the time it was like, because they would get full food, and so there'd be like food all over the table, right? And then they would be like working, and it was loud, and it was like, for me, there was just but I had enough self-awareness. Like, I never took my laptop out. Everybody else was trying to work, and I was probably distracting them. But I just I just recognized that for me, there was no way in that kind of environment that I was going to be able to focus and get anything useful done. And so sometimes there were other, places, like there was a hotel where there was kind of a quiet space that people could work. And I'd be like, maybe we should move over there, because if you want me to stop keeping you from working, like this is, so, I mean, again, it's the same thing that I kind of teach students. You have to have some level of self-awareness and just know, what's going to work for you, what's going to not, and do that. But as far as, traveling and being around people, that's just my jam. I'm even, when I come home, I'm even like on a high for like a week or two, depending on what the event was like, because it really fills me up. So
I think it's absolutely, and I equally, I love the travel, and I spend a lot of time in Malawi, in Kenya, working with some organizations around dyslexia, which was just incredible, like mind blowing when you're just listening to stories and taking it all in that side of it. For me, I guess whenever I've learned over the years that after an event, for instance, like before I'm speaking, for instance, I have to kind of classical music, for some reason, it's just been a godsend to me. It's just been something that naturally I picked up. It wasn't someone said, you must listen to this. It's just, again, like the martial arts, it's just something that I realize, how can I calm myself? So before I'm talking, or before I'm going to an event, or whatever it is, I put the classical music in, and I can't really talk to someone, because I feel like if I give too much of my energy away, then I'm not going to be able to do these things. And then I can have a full-on day, and then I would then have to kind of take myself away. But it's funny, there's different stages of classical music, and I didn't realize this. So it's almost like, so classical music would be, I'd put the headphones in, and there'll be just the instruments playing. There'll be no vocals. And once I'm at that stage, I know that I'm in a real stage where I need to kind of regain my energy and things. Then it leads up to vocals. And then after that, then it's softer songs like pop or something else like this. And then it can go into normal music. But that's something that I've kind of had to thought, how can I, because if I just put normal music in, that's just going to be the same as the noise. But it's funny, isn't it? It's how we self-regulate, how we understand how we can, work with ourselves.
Yeah. My youngest, actually, there's an app called Brain FM that I believe was developed by like Stanford, that helps you, it's, it has different settings, but it's supposed to be good for people with ADHD, and they have like a focus station, and then one for sleep and things of that sort. And to me, it's extremely annoying. And for her, she was like, it annoyed her too at first, but she has found that she sleeps better when she listens to it for like a half hour to an hour before she goes to bed. And she's like, yeah, it's annoying at first, but then you kind of tune it out and it becomes background noise. But there's something about it that helps her kind of like, I mean, people with ADHD, when you lay down, you generally have 4,000 thoughts all at once, right? And so that's why sleep tends to elude people very often who have ADHD. And there's something about this that makes a difference for her. So it's been pretty interesting.
That's really fascinating. I think it is those routines that you can put in. And I've said this before. I listened to the same. There's a gentleman called Brian Cox who does a lot of things around planets, universe, and things. And he created a show called The Universe. It's many years ago, and he's done several shows since. And I go to bed every single night and put my iPad to the on the side of the bed, and I will start watching 6-7 minutes worth of that program, and I would just fall asleep. And to this day, I've been doing this for years and years and years and years. And it was only a couple of weeks ago I put the program on, and I started watching it and thinking, I've never seen this bit, and it's just 4 60-minute shows, and I watched them for years and years and years. And I'm thinking, I've never watched all of the actual program. And I was quite interested, but I do worry that if I was ever to meet him, that he would be sort of hypnotized and sent me to sleep. I dare not listen to it in the car. So yeah, it's
I was just thinking he'd probably love to hear, like, on your podcast that he's like, every
he's
time I listen to him, I go to sleep.
he's just got just the most soothing voice ever. It's like velvet. It just sends me to sleep. So but yeah. Anyway, Angela, what does the future hold for you then, in the sense of what's next for Angela?
That's a good question. So my kids are on the cusp of flying the nest, right? So as that happens, and as we kind of transition to them being off on their own, I am kind of ramping up my speaking engagements. So that, as I said, I really love traveling. I love meeting new people. I love having adventures. So I'm kind of building that up and going to bigger audiences and global stages and things of that sort. So that's part of what I'm up to. I do have a book that I kind of am working on, but I'm not gonna deliver any promises on when that's going to come to be. But that seems to be the path that I'm starting to head on. I also am experimenting with some co-working sessions, like where business people come together and work in different environments and things of that sort. So that's one of my again, ADHD, I have a bunch of projects running, but for the most part, I'm kind of concentrating on building my speaking business right now.
And where can people find you? Is it on LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me. I'm on there. Oh, I hate to say, probably every day. I try not to on the weekends, but I'm not sure I stick to that. But I do have a pretty regular posting cadence on there, so you can find me on LinkedIn pretty much anytime.
Yeah, and you do have an incredible profile in the sense of, when I say this, is the knowledge that you share to your community, and it is just out of this world. So, and I think that comes down to, when we're talking about where can you find information and how can you connect. I think if people connect with yourself, they're going to get so much value. So. And I know it's not, someone that posts pretty much every single day for years on LinkedIn myself. I know how much work and effort goes into to be able to do this, to be able to serve your community. So I know it's no mean feat in what you do. You're talking, you're speaking, everything that you do. So yeah, all I can say is a massive thank you for everything you do for the community. That's and awesome. Your daughters.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I found you on LinkedIn. So, I made one of many friends that I've made through that avenue. So it's been very nice.
You did. Angela, thank you so much for joining us today on Stories. We will put all of the different links out and let everyone know how they can get in touch with you. And maybe when you do write that book, and we're not promising a date, maybe you can come back as a guest and tell us more about it.
That sounds awesome. This has been fun. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll speak to you soon.
Hi everyone, I'm Darren Clark, and I'm really excited to welcome you to this course on neuro-inclusion. Over the years, I have founded several businesses, spoken on stages around the world, and worked with organisations like Nike, Disney, Barclays and HSBC to help them build more inclusive workplaces. But the heart of everything I do comes back to one thing: helping people see neurodiversity not as a challenge to manage, but as a powerful part of human diversity. Throughout this course, we're going to explore practical ways to make workplaces fairer and more inclusive. From recruitment and onboarding to communication and well-being. It's not just about policies or processes, it's about culture. When teams understand and value how different people think, everyone benefits. My hope is that these lessons give you the insight, confidence and real-world tools to take back your own workplace.